Passage that we used last week that was like not one of those that maybe you heard a lot of sermons on. It was a unique one, but you kind of run into those when we teach through books of the Bible, and so we're in the book of Mark, and Mark is one of my favorite four Gospels. There you go. It's same old jokes. But when you hit some passages that maybe aren't the first ones that you get up to preach and talk about. And so today is another, it's sort of one of those conundrum ones for a second when you look at it. And when we look at it, truthfully, now, not that I lie to you normally, but, okay, this morning, we got in a car, and we were driving. And we happened to go by another church. Did you know there's other churches in town? Some of you didn't. You just came here because you thought this was the only one. There's some other churches in town, great places. And I drove by one, and I had to laugh because there was somebody outside apparently doing an impromptu photo shoot. And I imagine that then showed up on Instagram or Facebook or something. Now, it's okay to take a picture at church, right? It's okay to take a picture and chronicle your life. But I think sometimes what I thought about at that moment was how much, and we've said this before, but people take these snapshots of their life like everything's going well. And so when we even take snapshots of us doing spiritual things, like how many of us, honest, you don't have to raise your hand. I'm going to raise my hand. You can just kind of nod. If you do social media, I've taken a picture of yourself reading the Bible and put it on, or like a picture of the Bible in front of you with a cup of coffee. Yeah, I'm getting some head shakings. Because we do that. And part of, I love social media, and I hate social media. But I love it, but sometimes we kind of act like we have it all together. And I think with faith, we kind of want to act like we have it all together. And, usually Devin's here, and I make fun of Devin, but because Devin always dresses better than me, because, I set the bar low, really low. But, because sometimes we kind of, again, it's not wrong to dress up for church. I'm not criticizing. You guys look much better than me. I'm great. I'm glad you let me wear what I want to wear. But, we kind of dress it up and make it look like we don't have struggles sometimes. And I think that's sometimes, a lot of us struggle in our faith. Struggle to walk it out. Struggle to, it's one thing to, when someone's going through something to say, I'll pray for you, and I have faith that God's going to do something. It's another when you're the person, who's maybe going through something. And so today we're going to look at a guy who actually, he has a struggle with his faith. And so in Mark chapter 9, which you may have figured out because we left off last week in Mark chapter 9. See, if you want to read ahead, I'll give you a hint. We're going to be in chapter 9 next week. We're just leaving off at verse 29 this week. Anyways, in Mark chapter 9, starting verse 14, says, when they returned to the other disciples. Now, if you remember, strange passage, cool thing. Again, big seminary words, transfiguration. Jesus took a couple of his disciples. They're on top of a mountain. They kind of see Jesus in a sense for who he is, and it's this strange moment on a mountain. And so this is right after that. They come down the mountain. They saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of the religious law were arguing with them. And when the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. What is all this arguing about? Jesus asked. And it's funny, just like a line like they were in awe. There's all these commentators. I read lots of books and things, and people trying to figure out, okay, was his face shining? Was it kind of still like his clothes? Remember, they'd been, whiter than you could make white with all the launderers, that kind of stuff we talked about. It's, people trying to make, I don't know. I don't think he was glowing, or would have mentioned he's still glowing. but he returns, Jesus kind of shows up. I picture him just kind of like showing up. Like, you ever have someone just pop up out of nowhere? Again, don't do that to me, because I kick when I'm scared. And I remember kicking a kid in my youth group because he, scared me and came around the corner, and, I kicked Timmy. He was laying there on the floor. I got you. I'm like, you did. Don't tell your mom. But don't scare me. That's this place is like a maze. They built this church building in 4 sections. We got all kinds of nooks and crannies and doors that go nowhere. Don't jump out and scare me. I might kick you. So Jesus, I kind of picture Jesus kind of showing up, and they're intensely arguing. Jesus shows up, and it says the teachers of the religious law. Now, we are reading the New Living Translation. There's lots of other great translations. One of my favorite is the ESV, and it'll say the scribes. And if you kind of grew up in a more traditional church with a traditional translation, that's kind of the thing you get. And for most of us, scribe doesn't mean anything. I remember I was in Boy Scouts. I was the scribe at one point. It was like, and I think there was a feather, and the idea is you write things down, and you inscribe them. I don't know. Anyway, it might not be something that you typically think about as scribe, but these were. Jesus had a lot of interactions with the scribes, and we read that Jesus's teaching was authoritative, not like the scribes. And if you remember, Jesus heals a paralyzed man, and it says some of the scribes were there questioning in their hearts the legitimacy of what Jesus is doing. So they're Jesus' opponents in many ways. They're critical of Jesus because he hangs out with who? Sinners. We'll just kind of lose that, a loose translation. Sinners. So he's hanging out with sinners and tax collectors, bad people. It's the scribes who are critical. And the scribes, when Jesus is casting out a demon, they suggest he's doing it by, this is like pop quiz. Are you guys listening week to week? Hey, are you doing this by Satan? Is Satan driving out Satan? That was, we talked about that. And so they probably, they were based in Jerusalem. They were coming out to look at what Jesus is doing, to kind of evaluate his teaching, to figure out, is he okay? And they're often sort of at odds with him. And so the scribes are away from Jerusalem checking out Jesus. And, they come out and they're arguing. And you kind of wonder, as we're going to see, maybe they're still arguing about, Jesus' power, where it comes from, and they're maybe arguing with the disciples, and, Jesus isn't there, so they're arguing directly with the disciples, which they do sometimes. They're kind of questioning them. And it says, one of the men in the crowd spoke up. There's always one guy, right? One of the men in the crowd spoke up. He said, "Teacher, I have brought my son so you could heal him. He is possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever the spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." So, possessed by an evil spirit. Now, I know as soon as I say possessed by an evil spirit, there's a certain group that's either here or listening at home that's like, man, remember when they thought like disease was by evil spirits? Now, not all disease is by evil spirits. Now, some of you are like, evil spirit, because everything to you is a demon. Like there's a demon under every rock, there's a demon behind every rock, but there is physical illness. It often says Jesus heals physical illness, but it talks about the demonic. And in America, we tend to kind of not be more attuned to that. We kind of think, oh, that's the kind of, that's the old way of thinking. But there are demonic forces in the world. And so, there's, and the symptoms, if you hear this, it sounds a lot like what? Epilepsy or something. Now, it's not saying that epilepsy is all caused by demons. If you go in that direction and want to sit down and have coffee this week and talk about that, we can do that. So he brought his son to Jesus' disciples, and they couldn't do it. Hashtag awkward. It's it's like have you ever been like in front of the crowd, maybe you're just doing a presentation that you thought you could pull off, and then it didn't work out? Some of you are like, yes. I made Michael stand up earlier. We're testing the mic, and he's like, "Oh, you're probably awkward just being in front of them there for a moment." You expect certain things, and you would expect the disciples to heal. Because that's kind of what we expect. It's kind of like this week, someone posted a meme. What does your pastor say? Anyone see that one? It's always interesting the things you remember that I say. The joke about one of my 4 favorite Gospels. But see, that's intentional, so you remember there's 4. Some of the other ones are just oddities that I say. Like, you wouldn't expect me to get through a sermon without mentioning the book of Luke. because I do have an affinity for that one. Although we're doing Mark, you know, and I like Matthew too, and John's awesome. And I like the rest of the book too. It's all good. You wouldn't expect to wear an Eagles shirt without me making a comment of some sort. There's a whole other church over here for those of you who can't see that. We used to call it the 10:10 section. Now we call it the 9:45 because they come early to get that section because they can heckle me and I can't see them. But you know, you expect to see certain things, and so the disciples get up. They're expecting to cast out demons because they're doing that, right? And then this one doesn't work. It's kind of like me, like for some reason, I'm invisible to automatic sinks. You know, like the kind of like, I'll put soap on my hands and none of the sinks work, and I'm like expecting, I'm all the way at the end, and then some other guy comes in and uses the first one, I'm like, how did that work? You know, I feel awkward and stupid when someone else is there, and like the sink is working for them and it's not for me, or I remember, actually, Amy, you were on that trip. we did a trip to Mexico, and we were just happening to be on the mission trip, and the door locks, like it was the key kind, and like it would work, and like you'd go get ice, you come back and you know the key card doesn't work anymore. And so it's kind of like that, like you know, it was something they were so confident that would work, like they've been casting out all these demons. Why is it not working now? You know, it doesn't seem like, you know, and the disciples have been given authority to cast out demons. They'd gone out and done it. They'd had success with it. Now they're kind of wondering, like, why doesn't it work anymore? You know, I have the key card. This thing was working, and now it's not. I don't get it. Remember that trip? That was weird. Anyway, so Jesus says to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Now we all cross-stitch that. We put it on a thing on the wall. You know, fortunately, the person who puts our Facebook scriptures in here, like, she probably has a joke, put that one up for me this week. But, you know, Jesus isn't real happy with people. He says, "Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy, and when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into violent convulsion. He fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." You know, and so Jesus is being compassionate. He's, you know, hey, how long has this been happening? If you think about it, if it's been happening a long time, how many people do you think the Father's gone to at this point? Anyone here have kids? You know, a couple of you, you know, some of you don't. Some of you, anyone were a kid once, you know, have parents? That would be all of us. That's how it works. That was the talk. And so, you know, when your kids are sick, you'll do anything for them, right? Like, you'll stay up all night, even though you're tired, you want to go to bed, but your kid's sick, so you'll stay up with them. You know, and, you know, you'll seek medical care even if you can't afford it, and it's ridiculous and your insurance didn't cover it because your kid's sick. You'll do it. And then you become a teenager, you're like, you're on your own. No. But you know, when they're especially young, you'll do anything. And so you can picture, this father has probably gone to everybody to get this done, right? He's you know, like anybody in town, and so he hears Jesus is coming to town. You know, his disciples are nearby. He hears, so he's going. And says, "If you can help me," because you can imagine the pain and the anguish. If you have been trying to get help for somebody, and no one's been able to help. You know, there were lots of people in those days who would say they could cast out demons. You know, they would have gone to them, and you know, probably would have gone to the medical doctors as well, because they had medical doctors then. You know, who had done that. And I think there'd be like a certain sort of guarded hope, because we kind of criticize the Father for a little bit for being like, "If you can help." Like that sounds like a thing you shouldn't say to Jesus. Like, what do you mean, if you can help? Have you read the rest of this book? No, they hadn't. It hadn't been written. They were only in chapter 9. And so it would be like when I go to a party. So if you ever invite me over, I don't expect to have a good time. And that's not because you're not a great host. It's not because, you know, I'm sort of guarded with, because if you go into like a social situation thinking it's going to be the best thing ever, it usually is terrible. Like, you know, because it never lives up to your expectation. So I like to go in with low expectations. Kind of like most of you when you come to church on Sunday here. You have low expectations. You know, you heard it was the weirdest sermon ever. I was like, I prefer that be the straight strange passage, not strange sermon. But you kind of come in with low expectation. That's kind of how I picture him, kind of like, if you can help, it's sort of a guarded hope. I don't know. And I like this. Jesus says in verse 23, "What do you mean if I can? Anything is possible when a person believes." And the father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." And I think a lot of us are there sometimes with God. We believe, but we struggle a little too. And I think the Father wants to believe, but he's also been disappointed a lot. He wants to believe, but there's been a lot of failures and things along the way. And so he's come to Jesus. He believes that Jesus can do this. We don't know if he's from that region or took a long journey, but he has some faith, but he's struggling too. Now, here's perhaps the strangest quote you'll hear during the middle of a sermon. I'm going to quote atheist Richard Dawkins. And I know. We're not putting this on the Instagram page. But he says this. He says, "Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, lack of evidence." That is obviously a very pessimistic view of what faith is. And I think a lot of times atheists, I'm not hating on them, but I think they miss it because, Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Faith is not based in spite of evidence, but faith is based in a person. Our faith is based in the person of Jesus. Our faith is, it's not something we haven't seen and haven't experienced. It's something, it's a response to the things Jesus does. You can't see it, but we believe it. Can't see it, but we still have evidence of it. Now, I get to, I fly a bit here and there. I have faith that the plane will fly. And I did one time and thought the plane was going to crash and die. That was a weird story, I'll tell you later. But it didn't. It's okay, I lived. Obviously. I was telling a story one time about this time I thought the plane was going to crash and I was going to die, and I was confident of it, and I thought, I was telling the whole story, and people were like on the edge of their seat. I'm like, it's okay, I lived. I made it through. But I get on a plane, and it's interesting when you fly, because some people jump on a plane and they just, like, whatever, it's like something you do all the time. There's always, you can tell, like, there's the nervous people who think it's going to crash at any moment. But probably most of us, if you've flown any amount of time, you just don't even think about it, right? You just get on the plane and go somewhere. We're next to an Air Force base. We see planes all the time. We're like, oh, look, it's just a plane. We're not like, oh my gosh, will it make it? Yes! But we have faith. And if I were to sit down, this is a chair. I'm going to do a little more interactive today. If I sit in a chair, most of us, when we sit down, we don't think about it, right? Like, right, we know the chair's going to work because you sat down in the chair, and unless it's a trick chair at my house with rubber legs, I don't really have one. Now you're wondering. But, we believe it. Now, most of us have faith in a lot of things. If I go out for coffee this afternoon, and they hand me a cup of coffee, I don't test it to make sure there's no poison in there, right? You have faith that the person gave you coffee, not tea. I'm sorry if you like tea. But, if you order bacon, it's not going to be turkey bacon, right? You have faith in turkey bacon is not bacon. It should be illegal to call it turkey bacon. I'm sorry if you like turkey bacon. It's an abomination. And so is tofu bacon. Sorry. You hear me? You hear me? Amen. Sorry. If you're a vegan, you probably hate my sermons, because it always comes back, because bacon came up in all the things that I say, right? Bacon? Yeah. It came up, right? Bacon is wonderful. I don't know if you've ever had it. The men's breakfast, it's great fellowship. We study the Bible, but John can cook some mean bacon. I'm just saying. Oh man, my kids ate the leftover pancakes yesterday. They're like, oh, John Rundle pancakes. Apparently my pancakes aren't any good. They were good. They were fluffy, weren't they? Some of you are like, I'm going to go to the men's breakfast just for the pancakes. You'll be like the rest of us. You can just come in and clean up afterwards and eat the rest of the food if you want to. Anyway, it's this big moment of And it's based in truth. It's based on what Jesus is doing. And there's this big moment of, will God heal? Is my little faith enough? And we kind of, if you've read the Gospels, you kind of assume what? Jesus is going to heal, right? But he doesn't. He just walks away. I'm kidding. No. You're like, wait a minute. That's not. No. Okay. See, they put it up there. They're ahead of me. When Jesus saw the crowd of onlookers was growing, and again, Jesus is not trying to draw crowds. Jesus often draws crowds. He teaches the crowds. He loves the crowds. He feeds the crowds. But he's not trying to draw a crowd. He rebuked the evil spirit. Says, "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak. I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again." Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him. The boy appeared to be dead. And you kind of picture that moment. If you miss this, it's like he's laying there, and they're thinking, okay, the demon's left, and he's dead. The kid's just laying there. And a murmur ran through the crowd, and they're like, he's dead. He's dead. Oh no, Jesus messed up. It says, but Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. It shows us Jesus has this unparalleled authority and power. It was proclaimed by Peter. It was affirmed by God. And that's what we talked about with the transfiguration. I almost said transubstantiation. That's a whole other biblical theological word. Transfiguration. And then it's confirmed by miracles. Jesus can do things other people can't do. He can do things even his disciples can't do. Now, I was thinking about this side conversation, though, with the Father. Why does he have this, this side thing? And I think, Jesus heals because he has compassion. And I think he engages the Father to build his faith and encourages us in our faith, too. Here's the thing. If I get on a plane and I have confidence and faith, except for that one time, that the plane was going to get me there, it gets me there. Anyone here afraid of flying and want to admit it? Okay. If you get on the plane like trembling, scared, and like going, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. Not only do you freak out the other passengers, but if you get on the plane, guess what? It still flies. It still gets the same thing. So whether you have a little faith or a lot of faith in the plane, we get there. And so, Jesus isn't like kind of rebuking the man, but he's trying to build his faith. He's trying to teach him that, hey, I do care about you. The plane gets there because it's capable, not because of my confidence or my doubts. And Jesus is teaching the Father to believe even when we have doubts. Because we can believe even when we have doubts. Faith is not this that you always have it perfectly down. Faith is not even that you don't struggle and doubt at times. I think sometimes people make it out to be, like I have faith and I never struggle, I never doubt. You'll have struggles, you'll have doubts. But Jesus is going to show up and do stuff anyway. Even when we doubt, Jesus moves. And then, so verse 28 says, afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit? Which I kind of picture it like, is there a trick to it? Like, did we have to cross our fingers, put one hand behind our back, tie our left shoe differently? Like, is there a trick to it? Or maybe they were just really bewildered, like why doesn't my key card work? It just literally let me into the hotel room, and now it won't. And I've got a bucket of ice, and I've got to go to the front desk, which is like, well, anyway, that's my issue, it's not yours. And Jesus replied, this kind can be cast out only by prayer. Now, what does that mean? I don't think it means that Jesus had a special incantation or formula. Like, you'll even hear that, But guess what? When we read that, do we see Jesus praying? No. But if you look at prayer, it's not that it's a formula for exorcism. It's not that prayer he has in mind as this magical, invocation, incantation. But it's about having a close relationship with the Father. And that's what Jesus modeled. It's a habit. When we read the Gospel of Mark, Jesus regularly engaged in intense prayer. He went out alone to pray. The disciples interrupted him because they're like, hey, Jesus, everyone's looking for you. And Jesus is like, I'm praying. Which kind of tells you something about the disciples, right? They weren't. They didn't go out and pray with Jesus. They're always running around. The disciples seemed to have struggled. You know, he went out alone to pray, but the disciples interrupted him because they're preoccupied. And the one time he specifically asked them to pray, that, you know, even though we're doing Mark and we're in like week 28, we kind of jumped near Easter towards the you know, chronologically, and then we kind of have come back. But you know, the disciples, he says, "Hey, pray," and guess what? They can't. They're falling asleep. They're not getting it done. And you know, the disciples are sort of this negative example of what prayer is. You know, because they neglected. They tended to do things out of their own strength. And Jesus is this positive example of what it looks like to live a life of prayer. Now, the story teaches us about faith. The story teaches us about prayer. And prayer is valuable to God and builds our relationship with Him. But I think in our culture, it's hard and we struggle with prayer. And I was trying to think of some analogies of this, and I think one of the big, it's like marriage. Anyone here married? I always ask those questions, right? Do you talk, you know, what do they say the number one thing important of what? I'm kind of scared of this crowd. Usually they say, well, I'll just say, the number one thing they usually say is what? Communication. And that's a big part of it, because there's this communication that you have when you're with somebody that makes your relationship what it was. If you, like, you know, kind of, you love somebody, you get engaged, you come up. I've actually done several weddings here, you know, and it's like, you know, we do the wedding. There's actually a wedding here this afternoon. So could you pick up your coffee cups on the way out? But, you know, because you all leave them everywhere. You guys do not value coffee. But, you know, if we do a wedding, none of us, I think, would be like, okay, it was nice talking to you. I'll talk to you next year. You know, part of being married is you live together, you communicate, you talk. And if you want your marriage to be good, you communicate. And it's a struggle, it's a frustration, because usually you come from two different kinds of houses, there's all kinds of friction. But really, to make marriage what it's meant to be, there's a lot of communication. And it's the same with God. To make the relationship with God what it's supposed to be, there needs to be communication. Now, if I say to you, prayer promotes spiritual growth, are you shocked? No, right? But it's about as wow factor, it's about as exciting as saying eating healthy and exercising leads to weight loss and better health. You know? Because we know, if you've been in church any amount of time, you know prayer is a good thing. And we know we shouldn't eat nothing but bacon. But we struggle with each, because, you know, most of us struggle to eat healthy. Most of us struggle to exercise, and it gets harder as we get older. But, you know, most of us know we should pray, but most of us struggle to pray. Eugene Peterson, he's the guy who translated the Message. He was a pastor over here in Maryland. Really, really great guy. Anyway, he says, he had his book on pastoral integrity, and he observes about prayer and spiritual direction. This has not been tried and discarded because it didn't work, but tried and found difficult and more than a little bit tedious, and so shelved in favor of something or other that could be fit into a busy pastor's schedule. Because, to be honest, pastors struggle to pray. But I think that's true for all of us. Most of us struggle to pray. Not that it's not, you know, valuable, but it can be tedious. And we talked about it the other day. You know, there's times you wake up in the morning, and you know, we talk about, you know, getting up and having a prayer time, and that can become a legalistic thing where, like I've told you the story, like when I first came to faith, I was like, oh, it's just to get up at 5 a.m. and pray. Oh, it's just to read the Bible. Oh, it's just to read 2 chapters from the Old, 1 chapter from the New. I'm supposed to read a proverb. I'm supposed to sing a song. You know, and it got this like complex thing. It was like, okay, now I need to get up 2 hours before I need to shower because I've got this variety of things. Now, you don't want to make it a legalistic thing, but those things are disciplines that help us. You know, there's a discipline about prayer. I have lifted a few things in my life. I like to big things up and put things down. I've loved sports. I love lifting, and when I was lifting competitively, there were a lot of days I didn't feel like lifting. And when I was doing strongman feels, the workouts feel like you've been hit by a car every day. Like you just ache in ways and places you didn't even know you could ache. But I knew if I wanted to keep going, I had to work out more. And there's a discipline to it that even though you don't want to get up, and if you're a runner, you may not want to get up and run, but okay, I need to get up and run if I want to be healthier, if I want to have a faster time. And it's the same thing with prayer. It may not be the most exciting thing, but there's a discipline to it. And I think there's a lot of connection, parallels between the spiritual life and the athletic life. And Paul uses a lot of metaphors, so I can use them too. And I'm a dude, so I think of sports. And not that women don't think of that. It's just, it's a real easy fit for me. But even if sports is your thing, I think you kind of get what I'm saying. There's a discipline to it. There's a discipline to the spiritual life. There's a discipline to having a prayer life. It's easier, though, for most of us to do than to be. Maybe some of you it's easier to be than to do. What I mean by that is, it's easier to do something than to sit and pray. It's easier for me to go, feed the homeless and take an hour to do that than to pray for an hour. Because I think we're naturally, we're doers. We like to do things. And it's important to do. And we do a great amount of doing here. we do a lot. Because as a church, we want to be outwardly focused. The reason, you ever wonder why we're called deep water? Some people already know, it's just become a name now. But Jesus said go out into deep water, and so we've always wanted to be a church that's always out there serving the community. We do a lot of things to go out and engage the community around us. We do a lot of things to do. And that's important, but there's also, we have to be. Jesus said be salt and light to the world, but if we don't have a prayer life, then we're not going to be the salt and the light that Jesus commands us to be in the world. We're just going to be like the world. If we want to win at something in sports, and this, I guess I'm just talking to the athletes now, won't you do anything to win? I mean, you'll look at other people's workouts. You're like, okay, what does the best guy do? I got to do that. Or if you're playing high school football, you're like, what do the college athletes do to kind of get ready? And so you emulate that. Or if you're in college, you're looking at what the pro guys do to work out. You do that. You emulate what it takes to be the best. Well, if we look at Jesus, we see what it takes to be the best. He is God in the flesh, yet he prays. But often we don't. And prayer requires a quietness, stillness, and a culture that rewards busyness in getting things done. It's inefficient in a world that considers getting things done next to godliness. Something I read this week that I liked. Prayer helps us know God's will. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the behavior customs world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will know what God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. In prayer, God changes the way we think, or what we want to do. Because sometimes God has things for us that aren't what we want to do. Yesterday, I wanted to go hunting. I wanted to go out. It's black powder season. I had this vision of, it being this great day hunting in the woods. I probably should have prayed instead. I go out, and the mosquitoes were the size of helicopters, and Josh was covered in blood. We're standing there, and I'm like, what the heck happened to him? And it was the mosquitoes he was swatting. We were just covered in blood. We were nasty. We didn't stay very long. It was hot. Everything went wrong. Now, I wanted to go hunting. This probably would have been better if we just stayed home. And that's a lot of times we want things that God doesn't want for us. That's why we get trapped in sin. We get stuck in that stuff. But part of that, God would shape our desires if we spend time in prayer. God will shape us into wanting the things that he wants. Prayer helps us battle a spiritual world. Now, if you've been to like Sunday school as a little kid. You remember the whole armor of God thing?
Yes.
There was like the cardboard cutouts of armor, and it was funny, like the Mosers, a lot of you remember them. Shout out to David and Sarah for listening. They found this action figure in the backyard. People were trying to figure out what it was, and someone was like, maybe it's the armor of God. I don't know. That's what I was saying. Anyway, but the armor of God. Ephesians 6 says, final word, be strong in the Lord is mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so you may be able to stand firm against the strategies of the devil. We're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities in the unseen world, against mighty powers of the dark world, against evil spirits in the heavenly places. And so therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so you can resist the enemy in the time of evil. And then after the battle, you'll be standing firm, stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth. You kind of picture a Roman soldier here. The belt of truth, and and the body armor of God's righteousness. Kind of the big chest piece there. And for shoes, put on the piece that comes from the good news, so you will be fully prepared. And in addition to these, put up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. You kind of got this image going, right? Like all this cool battle armor. If you're a dude, I don't know if girls are into this. Dudes are like, yes. Give me a sword. I want to be the lark guy in the park. So 5 of you got that. Anyway, put on salvation as your helmet. Take on the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. I mean, that's like a powerful image, right? So now we're ready to go battle, right? What does it say right after that, though? Pray in the Spirit at all times. Stay alert and persistent in your prayers for all believers everywhere. And pray for me. And so pray, I will keep on speaking boldly. And so if you read after that, it's all this prayer. But I hear those images, I want to go out and do. I want to fight. I want to battle. But the truth is, the battle is about prayer. Because ultimately, it's not me that battles, it's God. And so we need to be people of prayer. Now, I've taken this too far in my life, though. I don't know if you know, I'm the guy who, like, if we go to get a trash can at church, I find out how much all trash cans cost. And then I evaluate the cost of liners for each one, whether they're sold in bulk, where they're sold, whether it would be easy something to get. And so just buying a trash can can take like 8 hours of research for me, which is why I'm often not the one to buy trash cans, because someone else. But it's the way my mind thinks. I was a chemist before, and so like I'm thinking of all the variables, the factors, and everything. And so like when I was younger, and I began to I'd get to the store and I'd want to buy toothpaste. What toothpaste do you buy? I'd pray about it. Like, God, what should I get? Should it be Crest? Should it be Colgate? And then it's like, God, I pray that whoever needs a job and what toothpaste factory they're working in, let me buy it from them. So, and then I start thinking about all the, that's too far. Sometimes you can just buy toothpaste. But it is a good idea to be in prayer about the things you do in your daily life, because a lot of us aren't. We just kind of live our life. We don't pray. And so be sure to be a person of prayer. And prayer helps us overcome temptation. Mark 14, right before the disciples fell asleep. Watch and pray that you do not enter into temptation. And I think a lot of times we fall into the same junk because we don't pray. Not praying is like, now I had a friend who did this, she was playing basketball one night, found out the LA Marathon was the next day, and went and ran it. Most of you, if that happens, you're going to have something called cardiac arrest. Death. Most of us aren't going to get up, she was very athletic. Most of us are not going to get up and run a marathon without what? Training. And so trying to, overcome temptation without training in prayer is like trying to run a marathon. It'd be like, never having lifted and trying to bench 500 pounds. You're going to have a, big dent in your chest. Even if you train, you're probably going to have a dent because it's a lot of weight. But, we don't train ourselves, and that's why we fall to temptation. So this week, we've been talking a lot about what it is to study the Bible. So I want you, don't give that up. We've got the class before this. We had a Sunday school class on studying the Bible. It goes for several more weeks here. I think 7 or 8. 7, 8, 9. It's a couple. Ask me later when I have the curriculum in front of me. Study. Again, get connected in groups. I think that's important. We try to get people connected in places they can grow. We've got a Wednesday night class going on. We've got things for you to grow, but don't neglect prayer. You have to develop that habit if you want your spiritual life to be what it can be. As the worship team comes back to play,